name is John Friedman with Titan Pictures, and today we will be going through the history and significance of the houses built right here in Eatonton, Georgia. I have the pleasure of speaking with Jim Marshall from the Eatonton-Putnam County Historical Society and Lynn Romine from the Eatonton Historical Preservation Commission. Thank you for both joining me here today.
Glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Pleasure. So real quick, I just wanted to kind of get a better understanding of what it is you do here. Can you tell me about your occupation?
Well, I'm a retired planner, land use planner with the state of Georgia, but I'm a native of Eatonton, grew up here, and bought this house in 1979 when I was still living in Atlanta and just worked on it on the weekends. And in 1974, after we lost several significant buildings, we had a movement to create our local historical society, hopefully to educate people about what we had and how to look at things in a new way. And hopefully that, would encourage them not to help us lose any other important properties. So in '74, I was elected president of our historical society, and I've been that for the last 47 years.
Wow.
So during that time, we've collected an enormous amount of historical information on not just the families, but the houses and the changes in the community that have happened over the years. So it's been an interesting hobby, almost full-time now. And
yeah, especially 40 some odd years. That's a lot.
A great thing to retire into, so that I could spend more time on it. So.
Lynn?
Yeah, and I just have to say what a treasure he is for Eatonton, because as I've mentioned to you, he has this memory that he remembers every date in person, and I mean it's like having the history all up here, and he has just been so instrumental in saving so many buildings and keeping this movement going. And I also was born here, so I have a lot of love for Eatonton. My family's all here, but then we moved to Atlanta in 1959, so I spent my high school years up there, and then went away with life and everything, and then moved back in 2000.
And what was the reason for that?
My mother was older, and I had retired, and I came back to Eatonton, and it was because it's always felt like home.
Right.
And got immediately they were organizing. The city was organizing an ordinance to protect a district, and so I got involved with Historic Preservation Commission through the city, through a city appointment. But in the meantime, I was teaching school and teaching Georgia history, so I love this stuff, and I think we've got a lot to be proud of here.
So you used to be a history teacher?
Yes,
then?
I did.
Awesome.
I just want to point out one thing about the Historic Preservation Commission. The actual original ordinance was written by the Historical Society and gifted to the city of Eatonton. And at the time, you had to publish guidelines, and the city did not have the budget for that, which fortunately they did by the time Lynn got involved, and so that then began to expand and grow. A lot of people are confused that we require things like what color you do your house, which is certainly not anything in the ordinance. It's mainly just to encourage people to maintain the historic and architectural
the material that it was originally built with. Yeah.
Original parts of the home.
Absolutely. So, can you both tell me what inspired you to bring these houses to their former glory?
Like I said, I grew up here, and fortunately had grandparents and aunts and uncles and good friends who owned old properties and loved the history of the county. I think of one cousin in particular, Ms. Lucy Hudson Stribling, who started before World War II in documenting the history of the community and the families and the cemeteries especially throughout the county. And she was one of our charter members in the Historical Society when we got going. So it was just sort of a process of osmosis. And then my undergraduate degree was in landscape or architecture, environmental design. And my dean, Hubert Bond Owens at the University of Georgia, when he found out I was from Eatonton, immediately nicknamed me Brer Fox. And so that became my handle, while I was in college, and then through the CB days, and now email and that kind of thing. So he, I think, and John Lindley, who was also the architecture professor at the School of Environmental Design, encouraged and reawakened really my interest in the history of the community. But then once I was out and went into private practice in Atlanta, I got involved in neighborhood revitalization up there. And one of my graduate level projects was a redevelopment plan for Midtown Atlanta. And we had 4 people on that plan and really learned a lot about working with community groups and with local elected officials and that sort of thing, which sort of, I think, was something I filed away and that I've used a lot since, is what I learned in those early days.
So did you start to feel sort of a responsibility then once you start to understand your role?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was because we had lost the Branch Bank building that was an mid-1840s building, and the Michael Dennis Mansion House, which were diagonally across from each other at the intersection of Jefferson Avenue and Sumter Street. That was in the mid-60s, and great public outcry locally to not do that to both properties because they were so historic. And we lost them anyway. And so we'll get into this later on. That was the very first example of encroachment into the National Register District, or what became the National Register District. And I think that was why the local community was so responsive when we organized. People came out in droves to join up and be members. And so with lots of publicity and tours of homes and that kind of thing, we began to educate people about what was the best parts of our community, the reasons to save them.
Gotcha. And Len, I'm assuming it's a similar
situation. And when I arrived here, of course, the Historical Society was well established, but we still did not have a tool to really protect, an ordinance that would really protect and say, this, don't do this and do this, and the positive and the negative changes that you can make when you are restoring a building, And so that really interested me because I felt like maybe we could make some headway, because a lot of times when people want to redo a building, they go, oh, let's just get rid of those old drafty windows and that old door, get rid of it, and we'll put all this new stuff in. What they don't realize is that they're taking the very essence of what makes that building historic.
The value of it.
The value of that. And so they're doing themselves a disservice, because when people who love historic buildings buy, they want the whole enchilada. They want the historic elements. They want the architecture. They want the old wavy windows. And there are ways of getting around that stuff. And some of these windows that people think are no good, they're made out of heart pine, and you will never get a window that good today. So it's like Jimmy says, it's a way to help educate people on the treasures that they do have. And we've got some beautiful old homes here. And those old homes are so important to the people who live here. And you can find, like he said, the outcry, when you start to lose one, then people are all upset, because that's part of their memory. It's all part of this sense of place that you have when you live in a community and you have these homes that have been there when you were a child and your family were children. Your father was a child and your grandfather was. They've always been here, so they're part of the landscape of your life. So
part of the legacy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And once you start losing those, you've lost the identity of your town, and it happens very slowly, one little house at a time, and suddenly you wake up one day and the whole street's gone. So
let's hope it doesn't get to that point. Yeah, that would be awful. So given the legacy that we're talking about here, what are some of the goals that the Historical Society and Preservation Commission hope to achieve?
Well, ours, in our charter, we stressed education, not just on the history of the county itself, when it was settled, who came in, what districts were settled first, when the schools were built, when the churches were built, that kind of thing, and the genealogy of the different families, but also the history and a heightened sense of awareness of the built environment. In the early 70s, most of the historic properties in what's now the National Register District and the Plaza District were owned by elderly single women whose husbands were deceased, and they had been left with these big houses to maintain. And we really owe them a great debt of gratitude because so many of them, I would say primarily all, most 99% of them loved their old houses, even though they thought they'd always been painted white. So we had a period when we had to go through education on historic colors for different periods of architecture. But they did a great service in just stabilizing what we had. And that's one reason we have such a rich fabric to work with, as you said earlier, in covering everything from the early Federal style all the way through the Craftsman and then post-war Classic Revival, which is still a popular style, even in new subdivisions. So what we've tried to do is also educate people on the fact that we had accomplished portrait painters, artists here as early as 1815. We had New England furniture makers here. This table right here is one that was built by Nathan Lyon in 1820. And we were just so very fortunate to, Nancy and I, to be able to acquire that and bring it back to Eatonton. Silversmiths, Daniel Booth Hempstead, another arrival early on from Litchfield, Connecticut. They all came down here from Litchfield, Connecticut. And we don't know why. We've tried to research that. And before I die, I'm going to go to Litchfield, Connecticut and look at their newspapers and see if there's an ad that the state of Georgia placed and said, y'all come south.
Skilled workers.
And we got all these wealthy people moving in from Virginia and the Carolinas and as far away as, Maryland and New Jersey, actually. Strange to think that some of our early people are, from New Jersey, but they were.
But you're probably not far from wrong because, when Putnam County was a late entry, into the state, it wasn't settled until 1807 and 1808, the county and the city, and it was all pristine timberland. And so they did open it up through the land lottery and through the headright, process of cajoling people to come down to settle and to clear the land. And so, a lot of people, you'd get whole families that would migrate from North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia. Well, a lot of people from the New England area, especially educators, came down from New England.
The thing that was so interesting to us is we began to peel back and dispel the traditions that were incorrect and the legends that were incorrect, and all of just the mess that people had invented or made up over the years about our past. We began to see that these family groups came in. It was not just the immediate family group, but 8 or 10 families that were related would move together.
And were they trying to escape from the New England states?
No, they were looking for new land.
Think about that.
Because Virginia and some of the other more northern states had the primogeniture law, which meant that only the firstborn male child could inherit.
Gotcha.
And so that meant that in most families you'd have 12 or 10 siblings that were just left with nothing. And so they were the ones that came down. We had a lot of our early settlers, especially in districts 1, 2, 3, and 4, which were the first ones given away in the 1805 lottery, out along the Oconee River, that had backgrounds in tobacco fortunes and came with lots of money. The Turners, Adamses, Hudsons, Pascals, Gregories came in and were able to just go to work right now. Hire people or, through enslaved persons, clear the land and begin to build a fortune for themselves.
And, and another thing we don't think about, this was a post-Revolutionary War community. When you look at the names of the streets, Madison, Jefferson, Marion, Eatonton, Putnam, these are all Revolutionary War characters,
Yeah.
And we forget that, we're also overwhelmed by the Civil War, but we were one of the first,
post-revolutionary.
For Georgia, going from being an English colony, and all this land west of the Oconee River was still Indian territory, and it was not settled. So this was all after the war, and as they opened up the lands, and people wanted to move west and they wanted to come south.
They were just
always looking for land.
Just hungry for new land.
Yeah.
And part of that, unfortunately, was the fact that they didn't know anything about scientific farming or fertilizing. And
so it was a learning process.
right. I mean, they would come in and in 10 years, they would right down to the hard baked clay. And all the topsoil had washed down the river and was in the sound at St. Simon's, and down in that area. So it was, that happened every time the lottery happened. We would have second generation family members from here move over. So the migration pattern was, as I said, from New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi opened in 1818.
Alabama first.
Well, Alabama, 1818, then Mississippi, Louisiana, and my crowd wound up in like 3 generations later founding Marshall, Texas, the city of Marshall, Texas.
Wow.
Which was a lot of fun to go visit, meet relatives out there. So we've learned so much by doing the genealogy of the families too. Just with this house, we didn't know who Mr. James Shackelford was until Ancestry.com happened. And I was an instant member of that and put out a query on that and said, does anybody out there know of James Shackelford and his wife, Martha Polly Broadnax Shackelford, who lived in Eatonton, Georgia? And within 20 minutes, this was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and within 20 minutes I had 40 emails from descendants. They're saying, we knew they came through Georgia, but we didn't know where. And so he left Eatonton a year after this house was built, and as being appointed by the President of the United States as one of the 3 commissioners to site the original capital of the state of Alabama. And for doing that service, he was awarded 6,000 acres of new land. So it's just fascinating. That's just one of the stories.
Yeah.
That's one story.
We get
one of many.
One of many.
I handle probably 250, 300 some odd requests that come in through Ancestry or just through different channels about families that have moved through here over the years.
So earlier we were talking about commercial encroachment. Tell us a little bit about what that is and some of the houses that were affected by it.
Well, commercial encroachment is one of the biggest threats to any historic district in any early town in this country. As the economy improved after World War II and the building boom started, there had never been really a significant boom like the one that happened after World War II. There was a great hue and cry to expand downtowns, first of all, and then we had the origination of what we call the box stores. Anyway, would come in and start buying up property contiguous to the downtown, tearing down the historic structures.
And this was because of larger corporations that were just
Well,
kind
it
of
was
paving
because
the
of a
way.
business that was already next door that bought the property for future expansion and parking. So it really is, a threat. We see that's one reason the Historical Society was so interested in getting the Bronson House, is that we saw it as an anchor for commercial encroachment into the northern end of the district. And the people we bought it from, the heirs of Miss Eunice Stubbs, had been offered $375,000 for that property to build a new post office on, and they offered it to us for $72,000 because they said, as Pete Stubbs, the executor, said, if we let the post office tear this property down, Mother and Grandmother would hate us till the end of time. And so we're so lucky that they did that and allowed us to put that major anchor right there.
Yeah, that was key. And that's one of the concerns I have for downtown. Right now, the downtown does not have a local historic preservation commission that would kind of guide and protect buildings. We have what's called the National Register District designation for downtown, but it doesn't really protect the buildings when owners want to do material changes to it. And anytime you form a local district, because it does require people to follow certain guidelines, there has to be buy-in from all the owners. You can't just lay it on them. So there has to be a sort of a united front that people say, yes, we would like to be part of this because we're worried about the about what's going to happen to our buildings. And you're going to find, the downtown has been a little hesitant about doing that protection because for fear that maybe people don't want to follow the guidelines because they think it's going to be more expensive or take longer or something like that. But in the long run, it's very protective because a lot of times when people buy down there and they put money into a building, they want to know that my next door neighbor, which is contiguous to my building, is going to be held to the same standards, because we're all part of the downtown. And then that's why when you go to some cities like Madison has a downtown local district, and so it does protect. It shouldn't be scary. It shouldn't be something people are afraid of. It really is for the benefit of all the building owners down there to know that everyone is going to be held to the same standard to protect the buildings. There is some development that is you can use old buildings for. We've got you've seen funeral homes in old buildings. You've seen these buildings that are right on the border of historic districts, and things like law offices and doctors' offices and things that work well in keeping the look of the old home. There was a lawyer downtown had a beautiful old home that he put his office in, but it kept the facade, so the look of the street doesn't change. The business may change inside, but
the old bank building is a primary example of being used for an attorney's office for many years, and really saved that property. One of the things that I think is unique about our National Register District is that we were the very last application to go into the National Park Service, Department of the Interior, without having to have every single owner's agreement to it. And that's why we have 247 properties listed within that district. Right. After that, it became much more difficult for districts to be created because you had to go to every single property owner. In many cases, in our case, it would have been extremely difficult because you had so many people properties that were owned by many heirs and continued to be owned by them. And so it just would be terrible to try to get permission from all those people.
Right.
So we were lucky.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our local district, the Plaza District, has 70 homes that are in it.
Gotcha.
And you had to have permission.
And they had to be buy-in from everybody,
Gotcha. Now you were talking about how there were 247 houses in the district. Tell me, what was the first house to be part of this restoration? Are all 247 houses part of this process, or?
Well, the reason for doing the district was to get, with the National Register District, was to give, first of all, the prestige of being recognized as an important nationally historic property, as well as protection from any federally funded program, like a highway widening or that kind of thing. Until we had the National Register District, if Georgia Department of Transportation had decided to widen 441 through downtown Eatonton, they could have taken out buildings on both sides of the street and all the houses up Jefferson Avenue if they wanted to.
Okay.
Fortunately, that didn't happen. The first house to be restored as a result, I believe, of what we were doing with the National Register application in the organization of the Historical Society was what we called the Old Presbyterian Manse, which was a one-story classic revival house over on Jefferson Avenue. And interestingly enough, the lady who did that then did the Davis House, which became the second one and tied with Slade Hall, which began in '75, to right on that corner to come back as restored properties. But we really owe a great deal of appreciation to Mr. and Miss George Lawrence, especially his Mrs. Lawrence, Louise, who had admired the Alexander Sidney Reed House at the end of Wayne Street, probably one of the most architecturally important houses in Middle Georgia, and purchased in 1957 and restored 57, 58. Two-story, great, actually three-story, great Corinthian or Greek Revival mansion. And people thought that they had absolutely lost their minds because, first of all, I mean, everybody says, well, how in the world are you going to heat it? Well, they figured out a way to use gas and using radiators to heat it. And my father, fortunately, who knew a lot about old properties, was asked to be the restoration contractor and brought that one back. And anytime, we've used that so many times in conversations with new owners and wanting to know about the district, the same questions you're asking today, as that was the seminal activity, main action that gave, I mean, they got Atlanta newspaper coverage, Macon Telegraph coverage for doing it, because it was at that time, it was such an unusual thing for people to do. This was we're talking about right in the middle of the post-World War II boom, in subdivision development.
And that was really before the big preservation of the Georgia Preservation Office,
even
established. So it was early, and
didn't happen until the early 1970s. Well, following the Lawrence example, when people began to ask questions about, well, is it feasible to restore Panola Hall? Another very early and Greek house, and very significant from an architectural and historic viewpoint. And of course, we said yes, and used the Lawrence's home and what they had done as an example of what could be done. So we've used, as more houses began to be developed, we used those as examples to show to newcomers, especially through the tours of homes that we did. In fact, our very first tour was a result of having been on the Georgia Trust tour of Madison, Putnam, and Greene in 1974.
So tell me a little bit about that relationship with the Georgia Trust.
Well, I was identified again by my college dean, Hubert Bond Owens, as a person that knew something about Eatonton, to the National Trust group that was the Georgia Trust group that was trying to do a ramble and to focus attention on the properties in this Tri-County area. And he gave me the name of the lady to meet with in Morgan County, Miss Jane Sims. And from there, she explained what the tour was all about, how it would be handled, that we'd get a cut, a little money to help. That experience taught us that we knew absolutely nothing about our local, architectural history. So we knew a little bit, and so we focused on it was easy to say whether it was a Doric order or Corinthian or Ionic order in the Greek style,
right,
or Queen Anne Victorian or whatever, but we didn't know anything about what that really meant. What the details
in each one of those categories. So you had to do a little more history into it.
So we started digging in and teaching ourselves as an organization what we needed to be saying and doing and referring to. So since that very first tour, we've hosted the Trust 4 times here in Eatonton in Putnam County. And each one has been a whopping success. And out of that, we've had people come in and buy houses. Either to restore and sell or to live here permanently.
Right.
So it's been a great, symbiotic relationship.
And then, Lynn, tell me about your relationship with Georgia Trust and the Preservation Commission.
Well, they're two separate things. They work hand in hand. The Georgia Preservation is part of the Department of Community Affairs now.
Okay.
And the Georgia Trust works separately there. And the Georgia Trust does a lot, like they have you can donate homes to the Georgia Trust, and then they will sell them to people, but they have to be restored. There are things attached to that sale that they have to do. So, and they do. And as I said, as Jimmy said, I think the trust is the public image of the preservation, because they're the ones that do so many of the tours, and they highlight so many things that are going on in different counties. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really brought a new interest in preservation to Georgia. Just think that's been, there was a period when old was not cool, and I think now old is very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
People look for that.
As a charter member of the Georgia Trust, it's been interesting to me to watch the evolution of, my generation that's beginning to fall by the wayside, and then our children, getting interested and really moving in and continuing the tradition and promoting historic preservation throughout the state. It's just a fantastic thing. Awesome. I'm going to give the Trust a really big plug. It was the very first statewide Historic Preservation Commission trust, and it has been the example for, I think, at least 16 other state trust organizations across the country. And
so they set the groundwork for all these other states. Yeah.
And it was because of pioneer thinkers like Jane Sims and Francis and Bill Griffin, who he was with King and Spalding, and their interest in Georgia history and architecture, and Marguerite Williams from Thomasville, and their interest and ability to commit thousands of hours of work, volunteer service, speaking and promoting and that kind of thing. Jane Sims, for example, came to Eatonton and was our very first speaker at our organizational meeting in 1974. And boy, when she got through with us, everybody was ready to sign up and pay their $10 dues,
Now, is it hard to find volunteers for that sort of thing, or?
No. We have, fortunately, over the years, well, initially we relied heavily on our teachers, public school teachers, and then that group as they retired. And then their daughters and sons are beginning to be called in to serve as docents. For example, we participated in the ghost tour this Saturday evening, and of the 6 docents I had down there, all of them's parents were involved in the organization of the society. So it's great to see that continuation.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed episode 1 of our E-Town special, Preserving Eatonton. To learn more, look to the links below. Join us next time for episode 2, where we will be discussing the various house styles and what made them separate from one another.